comments under that Wall Street Journal article show us how this issue, birth rates and aging populations, collects various anxieties, half-formed thoughts, dimly remembered headlines, loosely connected ideas, and probably a healthy dollop of prejudice too, wraps it all up in a bow and presents it anew. People's feelings about their own aging bodies and their children and immigration and abortion and the economy and all these topics are gathered here to be expressed, often in ways that have very little to do with reality. These people aren't really arguing in the intellectual sense. They're just venting their emotions. The technical philosophy term for this is a phantasm. Phantasms are a way of selectively organizing perceptions and feelings. It's a little bit like looking at the world through a prism. Things get refracted and distorted. In particular, feelings become facts, like, I feel as if old people are to blame. They are. I feel as if pro-Palestine sentiment is anti-Semitic. It is. I feel as if imprisoning immigrants makes me safer. It does. Phantasms are a mental mechanism for maintaining ignorance, and they serve a political function. By gathering people's disparate feelings under one heading, phantasms create an electoral coalition and drive support for policy. As our friend the arsonist showed us, the birth rates phantasm is very useful if you want to express extreme right-wing sentiment. But even leaving aside the neo-Nazi and Christian nationalist stuff, as Mullen points out, a moral panic about birth rates and aging populations is very useful if what you really want is to privatize healthcare and justify cuts to public spending. It's actually not clear that the economic arguments for doing that sort of thing are very good. If you slash public spending and disability benefits and winter fuel allowances, then old people get stuck sitting in cold, moldy homes, sitting around, getting sicker, until whatever's wrong with them becomes a full-blown crisis, at which point they end up in hospital if they're lucky, and prison if they're not. It may well end up costing society more downstream. Even aggressive policies aimed at boosting the birth rate tend not to work or have greater downstream costs. For example, banning abortion might sound like a quick way to get more babies and put a boost in the economy, but actually the impact it has on maternal mortality through unsafe abortions and the impacts on women's ability to participate in education and the workforce mean that, quite apart from the moral cost, you can end up with an even bigger bill. But ignorance is its own reward. This bad philosophy and ugly stereotypes are very useful if you want to slash the social safety net, not even necessarily because it's going to save you money, because it might not do that in the long run, but to sustain a fantasy of individual responsibility. This whole discourse only makes sense if you assume that a more sustainable and equitable economy is impossible. And that might be why so many centrist journalists spread ignorance on this issue. That ignorance maintains capitalist ideology. It's a luxury belief. It forestalls radical change. No wonder Mr. Musk is such a big fan. This is a crucial point to internalize. Whilst demographic changes can result in changes to the pressures on the economy, steps like raising the retirement age or privatizing healthcare and pensions are not the only way to respond. There are other choices on the table, like taxing wealth. But by pointing to the natural fact that human beings are born and age, politicians grant their preferred policies the appearance of inevitability. And so, they justify maintaining the status quo.
Aging is being used to legitimise measures to cut back on government health spending. As with the pension issue, the shift in policy is away from collective provision towards personal responsibility. And again, it is the supposed impact of the ageing population that is used to justify these changes as politically neutral and unavoidable. The implications of population ageing for health service costs are grossly distorted and inflated in most discussion about the future of public healthcare. As with the pensions issue, it appears that in the health discussion, demography is being made to play patsy as the ideologically and politically neutral pretext for containing state expenditure on health. Through the prism of demographic shifts, society's problems are interpreted in a fatalistic manner.
Broadening our focus slightly, the birth rates phantasm is just one example of a phenomenon we're seeing more and more. The right wing of politics expresses their feelings about a topic that, by and large, isn't real, like late-term abortions or migrant crime, dangerous trans people in bathrooms, dangerous vaccines, painkillers causing autism. Centrists then say, oh, we have to take their feelings seriously, and that functions as a distraction or a delay tactic to prevent governments actually addressing real problems. You might remember, we've discussed phantasms on this show before, in our episodes about gender, and also the one we did on urban planning. And we can find them at play in foreign policy and security. The Iraq War was launched in response to 9/11, something Iraq had nothing to do with, and justified by the claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which they didn't. That was a phantasm. It feels like they might have WMDs. They do! In his book, We the People of Europe, philosopher Etienne Balibar says governments who fail to meet the needs of their people can prop up their credibility through violence against phantasmic threats. We could view the actions of violent nationalist leaders like Vladimir Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu through that lens. And there might be an example closer to home. The current British government are very unpopular. Per this article in The Independent, they've recently taken the controversial step of declaring Palestine Action, a direct action group who had been protesting Britain's complicity with the Israeli government's genocide in Gaza, a proscribed terror group. That means that members of the British public are banned from expressing support for the group on pain of up to 14 years in prison, with the word support being somewhat vaguely defined. The result has been the controversial arrest of over 1,000 peaceful protesters, including several pensioners and disabled people, for wearing t-shirts or holding placards in support of the group. And also this man who was arrested for wearing a t-shirt that said Plasticine Action and later released. Now, the UK's Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre say, Palestine Action does not advocate for violence against persons. Former Home Secretary Yvette Cooper claims to have seen evidence they were planning violence, but at time of recording that evidence hasn't been shown to the British public. So we can imagine a scenario where that evidence turns out to be nothing, like the Iraq War dossiers. If that turns out to be the case, that'd be an example of a phantasm at work. It feels as if they are violent. They are. Time will tell on that front. Whether that evidence exists or not, though, the government are using this crisis as an opportunity to look tough whilst not helping people with other, definitely real problems. And that is an example of what Balibar is talking about. I include that illustration here to show you that this philosophy is not just an academic matter. Phantasms can and do change history. There are plenty of real problems in the world. But why spend your time and energy fighting those, when you could struggle with imaginary ones instead?